Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. Hopefully you've all got coffee in one hand and a notepad in the other hand, and you're looking forward to 45 minutes of learning about the latest public sector engagement techniques. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping before we get started today. So make sure that you are logged into YouTube so you can join in the chat conversation. I can see a few of you already doing that. If you do have any questions as we go along, just pop those into the chat box and myself and Darren will pick those up at the end. If you do have to duck out early, don't worry about that. A recording of the webinar and a copy of the public sector online engagement guidebook will be emailed out over the next couple of days to everyone here today. Also, it'd be great if you could get involved in the conversation, not just on YouTube. We've also got a Twitter hashtag running today, which is online 2019. So any thoughts, ideas, conversations, talking points, examples that you have as we go through the slides this morning, it'd be great to see you guys sharing all that knowledge and best practice on there as well. So your presenters this morning are myself, Stuart Banbury. I'm the marketing director here at Orlo. Many of you will probably know us as Social Signing before our rebrand back in September last year. I'll talk a bit about that at the end today. And I'm also joined by the ever delightful Darren Cavaney.
And yes, I have paid Stuart to say that. Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining.
So you can see here at Orlo a few of the brands we work with. We work with a lot, probably 400 or 500 different organizations around the globe to help them create powerful kind of social engagement, online experiences for their customers. We're going to be sharing some of those insights this morning from some of the kind of industry examples that myself and Darren see as we're on our merry travels up and down the UK. So before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the webinar this morning, I'd like to just kind of set the scene just for a couple of minutes on kind of, I guess, some of the trends, challenges, opportunities that we're seeing out there at the moment across the digital landscape. I think it was it's kind of around 12 months ago now, we saw the Cambridge Analytica scandal kind of start to surface in the press. And there's obviously been subsequent data breaches since that. So this raises trust issues around social networks themselves, how they use and share our data potentially, but also how organizations also use not just social data, but wider data as well. And I think we're coming up to the 12-month anniversary of GDPR, if I dare mention that as well. So yeah, I think, definitely questions around data and trust are kind of high in the public consciousness at the moment. Then we have some of the new trends that we've really seen emerge over the last 12 months. So Facebook groups have grown to be a really important tool in a kind of comms arsenal at the moment. Advertising, social media is becoming even more pay to play now. If you've got a really important campaign, piece of PR, piece of news that you want to get in front of even people that like your Facebook page, you have to put some budget behind those now. Organic reach is pretty much down to single figures. And we've also seen the continuing rise of influencers on social media. So a really effective way for people to extend their organic reach by finding influential thought leaders that operate within the same space as themselves. In terms of customer engagement, so we've probably seen in the news over the last 12 months, quite a few high-profile PR disasters from online engagement handled badly. And hopefully, as we go through the webinar this morning, we can flag up a few different tips and tricks for you to kind of handle some of these circumstances that arise in the best way possible. And I think certainly now we see that kind of being human, personable, warm, friendly, relevant is certainly the way to go on social media if you want to drive that engagement. It's not just the public that favor that, but also the algorithms within these social networks themselves. They're favoring that kind of human, relevant, visual content a lot more strongly now. So hopefully we can flag up a few of those examples as we go through this morning. So the study that this webinar is based on is the largest ongoing study into public sector online engagement I think myself and the guys at Comms 2.0 have been running this for around 3 years now. And every year, hundreds of organisations take part and complete the survey, which allows us to then produce all this free learning, these webinars and these guidebooks to share around all of that latest thinking, allowing you to benchmark just where you're at in terms of digital engagement, online engagement, and to peek over the garden fence and learn from what the neighbours next door are doing and start to use some of those ideas within your own kind of comms campaigns. The people completing the survey are a really broad spectrum of comms managers, customer service managers, PR managers, anyone that has an interest in kind of comms and public sector engagement. Okay, so let's kick things off. So to begin this morning, I'd like to just talk for a couple of minutes around social media volumes and team sizes. How this is going to work is I'll flag up half a dozen or so of the really interesting trends from this year's survey and guidebook, and then Darren will bring those to life with some of the techniques, best practices and industry examples that he sees while he's on his travels up and down the UK. So to begin with, I think overwhelmingly what we can see is following the same trend as the last 3 years, is that social media volumes around inbound messages continue to rise year on year. And you can see that overwhelmingly across all the different subsectors within the public sector, apart from charities where it looks like they've largely stayed the same. But yeah, I think certainly that's the key takeaway from this graph. Now, to kind of look at that through the lens of team sizes, what we also saw this year, actually, although there is this continuing wave of inbound social media messages, that's not being met with an increase in terms of headcount or resource in terms of team sizes. Largely this year, team sizes remain the same or decreased in some areas. So this means that if you are trying to grow your social media presence and to grow that engagement, potentially not having the right amount of resource or the right number of people within your departments is going to undermine some of that activity. So if you're not getting back to people with a really fast, effective response, it's then very difficult to grow followers, grow engagement, or maybe to encourage people to see digital channels as the best way to speak to you going forward. So just to kind of emphasize that point to begin, it's really, if you are looking to grow that digital presence and drive that engagement, it's really important that you meet that growing number of inbound messages with an equal volume of resource. Darren's just going to talk now about how some of the people out there are kind of coping with some of these trends.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, absolutely to that. What we've seen across the public sector is not always, but very often reducing team sizes, reducing resources, but actually greater expectation, greater work demand flowing in. And obviously, you get to the point where that's quite difficult sometimes to, excel on social media, for example. So loads of great examples. I thought one that I would bring to play here, given that emergency services in the survey saw the largest increases in terms of inbound demand, I thought it'd be good to flag colleagues from emergency services. So this is South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue, and they're a small team. They're perfectly formed, led by Alex Mills and 2 colleagues. They're a really busy team. What I love about their work, though, is they consistently deliver really, really creative work. So some of you will have seen their Operation Chip Pan campaign that ran in 2017. That won 3 awards. And it was a fantastic example of delivering really creative work on a shoestring budget, but actually had a big impact, and the outcomes were a reduction in chip pan fires in South Yorkshire. If you haven't seen the video, go and have a look. We'll share the link afterwards. I think it had 6 million plus views last time I checked. Again, they won an award last year for another campaign, which again included a video, and it was My Firefighting Mum. Now, there's a few reasons for them doing this. One was in order to encourage more applications from women applying to be firefighters. And secondly, it was to showcase and really flag and wave a flag for the brilliant work already done by existing firefighters. So in terms of women firefighters, interesting here in terms of their approach, Alex's approach, and of course this one's up for debate and one size fits all never works, but Alex and the team there are very clear that they have one Twitter account and one Facebook account. They haven't gone down the multiple accounts route. That's, you know, contentious. Some people like that, some don't. But actually, who can argue in terms of this example, because it's worked really, really well. The campaign itself, we won't show the video here specifically now, but the link's there and we'll share it obviously in the slides afterwards. Go and have a watch of that video. I think it's 2 minutes 19, you know, and it might even bring a tear to the eye. It's a fantastic example of actually celebrating the work of women in the fire service with a story told by the children of those mums. It's fantastic. I don't know how much it cost to produce. It was probably peanuts, but it's a brilliant example of what can be done with a campaign within a really small team that's under a lot of pressure. I think one of the things I find on my travels is that comms teams are struggling for the time to be creative, and one of the things that I think Alex and the team are very good at there at Safe Yorkshire Fire is saying no as much as possible to the nonsense requests that come in so they can focus on the really big priority work, because you know what, to be creative takes time, doesn't it? So hats off to Alex and the team there for their work.
Okay, thanks for that, Darren. So moving on to the next trend that we spotted from this year's survey. Interestingly, what we saw this year, in contrast to previous years, where overwhelmingly it was the comms teams responding to customer service questions that always tend to come through as comments on social media posts. What we saw this year is actually both departments starting to work a lot more in collaboration. Particularly we're seeing this in local government, emergency services, in the housing sector. And I think this is a great thing to see, because undoubtedly it's the customer service teams that are best placed to respond to a lot of these kind of inbound questions that result from a lot of the comms campaigns. And again, just going back to what I said earlier, if we can give people, give the public an effective first-time response on social media, that's where we can start to influence behaviour and start to encourage people to see these digital channels as the best way to speak to us. But obviously that needs some a bit of kind of stitching together behind the scenes. These two teams need to have kind of great internal comms, internal dialogue, great internal relationships to really get the customer service teams to buy in to what's trying to be done on social media and not see it just as another headache or another kind of contact channel to manage. Actually, if we can shift that perception and try and get customer services to see social as an opportunity, maybe to take some of the pressures off the phone lines, off the email, and from an organisational perspective, just to bring the organisation to life with some personality and to appear relevant. It's great to see that across some areas of the public sector, we're starting to see that happen now.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I think there's almost a Venn diagram, isn't there, of social media for comms and customer services, and absolutely, it's both parties' responsibility. So I think we've seen a lot of innovation and refinement of this since the last survey, and in fact over the last 3 years that we've been doing this research. In truth, probably not all organisations have cracked this yet, and it's ongoing work, I think it's fair to say. I think Nick's on this chat actually, isn't he? Hi Nick, if you're listening in. I didn't know you were listening in, but I'm going to big you up here just first off. So I think Leeds City Council set a really high benchmark for their approach on customer social media use. I think the accounts are 10 years old now, so this is not new work. Nick Moore, I think, has got a customer services background, but absolutely got the comms and the social media importance, and developed a Twitter account and a Facebook page specifically for customer services inquiries. So these are separate from the main corporate accounts. You can see there on the little visual that the Twitter account's got 24,000 followers. I think the Facebook page has got even more now, actually. So this is set out specifically to deal with customer services inquiries. One of the things I like, and one of the things I've spotted is a bit of an issue in some public sector organisations still, is quite often Work has been done in the comms team around the tone of voice that we use on the corporate channels, and there's so many good examples of that out there now we could talk about. But sometimes that tone of voice is a little bit different when it's coming from a customer services team. Sometimes it's actually better, sometimes it's not. And I think there's something around the two teams working together around that consistent approach to tone of voice. I think the Leeds model does that really, really well. So well done to Nick for that. I think there's a case study that Nick wrote a couple of months ago, actually, and the link's there if you want to go and have a look, which is on the Comms 2.0 website, where Nick shared his top 10 Facebook posts and why they worked. What's really interesting is actually, as comms people, we often get carried away with, the big fancy campaigns and flashy videos and, big design graphics and et cetera, but actually customers and patients and residents are generally most interested in our bread and butter services, and that was borne out with Nick's post here, and in terms of the things that came out as the most popular posts across 12 months. So would definitely recommend you go and have a little read of that, and thanks Nick for that really insightful post and case study. I think we can learn a lot from the transport and train companies and public transport providers here. And this is topical. Just last night, I was trying to get home to Birmingham from Manchester, and I was on a cross-country train, which suddenly stopped in between Stoke and Stone, actually. And when you're sat on the train and it stops for 15 minutes and you think, something's not quite right here. So what did I do? I went straight to Twitter and had a look. And so there we were. There was an update. Lines are currently closed due to an emergency services operation between Stoke and Stafford. So I was very quickly able to find out exactly what was the problem. In the end, we got diverted back up to Crewe, and I got home about 2 hours later than planned. But the important bit is actually social media is where we often now look, because actually I was getting an update quicker on Twitter than I was on the actual train, which was interesting. There's lots of examples out there. I think in previous chats, haven't we, Stuart? We've mentioned Virgin Trains, and they're a bit of a Rolls-Royce service for how to run a Twitter customer services account. As I was in Manchester, I was taking a look at Transport for Greater Manchester's customer services offer here. Theirs is interesting because actually what's often the case is in Greater Manchester, there's a lot of work going on and a lot of initiatives around transport. So that might be clean air policies, sustainable transport, cycling initiatives. So they talk about a lot of that on their Transport for Greater Manchester Twitter account. Actually, if you're a passenger late for work and there's a delay on the Manchester Metro link, that might not be content you particularly want to see at that moment, because you want to know when your tram's going to arrive and how late you're going to be for that meeting or for that appointment. So they've got theirs split across two accounts there, which I think is quite an interesting and quite a useful way to do it. There are other approaches and other methods for how to best do this. But I do think as perhaps local government, central government, NHS, emergency services, we can learn a lot from the transport platforms and accounts about how they deal with customer services almost in real time, because the expectation to get quick answers now is becoming more and more expected from our customers. And I suppose just really for the chat, we haven't got all of the answers to the best practice examples out there. So if you're doing something brilliant in terms of social media and customer services, please flag them. Share your case studies with Orlo and with myself, and we'll put them on the Comms 2.0 website as case studies. So as I say, during the chat and afterwards in the Q&A, do let us know if you've got great examples of where you're doing good things with this.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Switching things up a little bit now and going from customer services to comms. So next we looked at the channels, or the social media channels, and the content that's driving the most engagement. And we saw quite a few subtle differences around this across the public sector. So as we're in local government, central government, housing, emergency services, Facebook was the dominant social media network to receive inbound content. If we look at education, charities, healthcare, even a bit in central government, it was actually Twitter where we saw the most engagement. if we also look at the content that these different areas are pushing out across these different social networks, similar to last year, we saw that content around core services drove high levels of engagement. But actually, interestingly, this year, I think we saw much more of a kind of an approach towards sharing content that isn't just based around what we do and the services that we deliver, but it's actually it's content that's just maybe sometimes it's a bit fun, it's a bit kind of humorous. It's just kind of relevant. It's talking about what's happening in the news, what's on TV. And I always think that the organizations that do social media really well use social media just like you and I use social media. And I think just by sharing some of that content that is maybe a bit more lighthearted, a bit more relevant and topical, that's where we can really bring our social media channels to life, to give them some personality and to start to encourage those higher levels of followers and higher levels of engagement.
Thanks, Stuart. Now, you know I'm a bit of a fanboy for Doncaster Council. I mention them regularly on my travels, and no, I'm not paid commission by them. But I think, you know, we've talked about them before, and there's a really great case study again on the Comms 2.0 website. If you've not seen it, do go and have a look. I think they've absolutely nailed the being really, really creative, but for content that's around the subjects and the issues that their residents find most important. So they understand the things that make a resident ring the contact centre, and they have created content around them. So some people might say, oh yeah, but you know, speedboats being abandoned and all that kind of brilliant content they've shared before might to an untrained eye look like it's fun, but you know, what's the return on that? The return's huge because they're talking about the issues which are of most importance to residents and local businesses. And I love the way they do that. So many good examples. I really like the example. Do you remember during the World Cup last year when England was surprisingly doing quite well, and Gareth Southgate and his waistcoats became quite famous, didn't they? And then there was that whole, are we allowed to raise the flag? And does that cause all sorts of issues about identity and being a bit nationalistic? What Doncaster did was they kind of ignored all of that, and they decided to just go and raise a waistcoat up the flagpole, which was brilliant. I think it ended up on Sports Illustrated worldwide website. And it transcended the silliness that you can get dragged into in a local authority. And it just did something fun that was celebratory. But that creativity doesn't happen by chance. They do make the time to be creative. And if you read the post that it was Nick Fromont in the team there has written, what they say is we allow ourselves 15 minutes to create to have an idea. And if we can't nail a great idea in 15 minutes, then we'll move on. And I think that's a really good approach and kind of, you know, a nice parameter to work within. 15 minutes, can we come up with something? If not, we move on to the next thing. So again, hats off to Doncaster. I think for me, the biggest challenge is if you run a social media account for an organisation, opportunities pop along literally every single day, but it's what you do with the opportunities, and it's whether you're geared up to be able to respond. Now, this is a really interesting one. So this is quite topical. This happened just last week, actually. So Joe Lysett, who's now a near neighbour of mine, did you know, in Birmingham. Now, you know Joe Lysett, if he ever tweets you, you need to be a bit nervous because he does like to have conversations, shall we say, with any authorities that are putting red tape in the way of him getting what he thinks he wants. Not in an unreasonable way, but you don't want to be on the wrong end of this. So this was a great example. Joe Lysett was having a kitchen extension built in his Birmingham suburb home. So he emailed the Lord Mayor of Birmingham to ask if she'd unveiled the kitchen extension, LOL. Now, a bit of fun. But actually, this is a fantastic opportunity for the council to engage with someone that's, let's face it, is well known, is influential, has got over 500,000 Twitter followers, over 500,000 Instagram followers. This is an opportunity, but it's an easy one to let slip. They didn't let it slip. So hats off Birmingham City Council and the Lord Mayor, Yvonne Mosquito, isn't that a great name, said, yeah, we'll do it. And she agreed to go along and do it. What was really funny was so Joe Lysett decided to name the extension the Mosquito Wing in honour of the Lord Mayor, Yvonne Mosquito, which was fantastic. Joe Lycett managed to get Radio 1 to cover it live. So I actually tuned into Radio 1 for the first time in about a decade. So that was interesting. Midlands Today TV covered it live. And there was Joe Lycett did a live Instagram to his 500,000 followers as well, with the Lord Mayor cutting the tape on the new kitchen extension. This is fun. This could look like light-hearted nonsense, couldn't it? But this is gold. This is social media gold for me, and I absolutely love it. So here's Joe and Yvonne with the unveiling of the plaque on said kitchen extension, which was brilliant to see. And actually, that evening, this was the second most watched bit of content on the BBC website nationally. So from the daft and the silly can come something really quite important, and that's the kind of stuff that reputationally can be really, really important for an organisation like a council, which quite often is on the wrong end of reputational damage. So really great work. So the message for me was, when the opportunities pop along, it's about how we take advantage and how we maximise them.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Some great examples there. Okay, so looking briefly now at some of the new contact channels that we're starting to see emerge over the last 12 months. The biggest one of which was web chat or live chat, depending on what you call it. We're starting to see this really make some inroads now across charity, education, housing, and even a bit in local government. I know some of the events I've been to over the last 12 months or so, and speaking to people around some of these new contact channels like live chat, we're starting to see councils and other public sector organisations place kind of live chat buttons on some of the key pages on their website, maybe where people run into a bit of difficulty. So it might be setting up your own council tax return, some kind of direct debit. And what we're seeing really now is, and there's a stat here from Gartner, all about the effortless experience. That people now are very much more concerned with just getting their issue resolved rather than using their preferred channel of choice. So if we can start to give people a very frictionless, easy way to speak to us and to self-serve and to get their questions answered, again, we can start to encourage digital as the best place for people to go to. We're starting to see this across all different websites now. So there's an example here from West Midlands Police, who've got a live chat button on their contact form on their website. And interestingly, what we're seeing now across the police more generally is that at a national level, the police are driving this project because they know there's an appetite from the public to speak to the police on digital channels. So I guess that's kind of thrown down the gauntlet now to them to be kind of prepared behind the scenes to respond on these channels. So live chat we're seeing now pop up on quite a few police websites, and again on maybe certain specific pages on council websites. And again, if you can serve someone there and then on live chat when they're trying to set up some kind of council tax return, it's one less call that's going to come through on your telephone lines. It's one less email that you're going to receive. And the beauty for the customer service team is, agents can handle multiple chats at any one time. So lots of benefits, both for the public and for the organisation around things like live chat and social media. Okay, so skipping through now to crisis comms. I think, this is particularly relevant today, being as it's the 2-year anniversary of the Manchester Arena attacks, hence why we kick things off a couple of minutes later today. And it's great to see that in the large, most organisations do have a documented and rehearsed crisis comms plan in place should an emergency arise. But actually, in some of the areas that we surveyed, there isn't such a plan in place. And I think obviously, the events that we're marking today show just how important it is to have a document that's documented, rehearsed. It's been practiced by everyone. Everyone agrees to it, and it allows you to kind of to initiate that coordinated comms campaign should some kind of crisis emerge. So over to Darren to talk about an example now from Tower Hamlets.
Thanks, Stuart. This was a brilliant example. Andreas, the Director of Comms at Tower Hamlets Council, and the team actually presented this at the Unawards Winners Masterclass 2 weeks. One of the best presentations I've seen all year, actually. We know that a crisis, if you're in public sector comms, a crisis, is always just around the corner, isn't it? We've all dealt with them on various different degrees of severity. One thing's for sure, though, they always end up on social media. Now, that can be within 30 seconds if it's something really big and impactful, like the arena attack in Manchester. Other things might start in the more traditional media, but then quickly end up on social media, and this was the case with the example at Tower Hamlets. Now, from my own bitter experience of being an in-house head of comms and director of comms, the media don't always cover stories and issues with complete truth, shall we say, without getting the legal team here at all worried. But it's fair to say that. We've all seen untruths being told about our organisations. And again, sometimes it's about being brave and taking a stand against this. And clearly, you'll pick and choose your battles. But on this one, some of you might remember this was a Times article which covered an issue around a Christian child forced into Muslim foster care, and managing not to cover lots of the actual facts of the story. So the Times kicked this off with a front page story. This suddenly is a huge reputational issue for the council. So the comms team were very quickly into operation to deal with this. Of course, the Daily Mail and others picked up on it. MP's anger as Christian girl forced into Muslim foster care. You can imagine how this was then being played out on Twitter and on Facebook. The council were very, very proactive, and Andreas and the team dedicated a lot of resource to quickly challenging some of this. They produced, we won't go into huge detail now, but have a look when you get the slides. There's a fantastic infographic there, which is kind of, here's the false claims by the Times, and here's what the judge actually said when this thing went to court. Completely, bit by bit, dismantled what, leading national newspaper had said, grossly unfair, some of the coverage. But, people see a headline and assume that, blooming council's done X again. And that was very much the case here, but it just was not true. So what was great, because of the very proactive response that the council comms team took, other media outlets began to give a much more balanced bit of coverage. So Independent, BBC, Guardian began to cover this and actually talk about what really happened and the detail behind it, because there was an awful lot more to it. The council made a formal complaint to IPSO, and that did its thing, and an inquiry followed. Because of the response that the council gave, and because it was very proactive and a bit in your face, just in terms of this isn't true, these are the facts of the matter, other people then came to the council's support, which of course is always one of those great things, isn't it? And there's a quote there from the chief executive of the Adolescent and Children's Trust, who was speaking on ITV. The Times story is nonsense. It's a complete lie. To be a foster carer, you have to have a long-term assessment and have good spoken English, and to suggest otherwise is utterly fallacious. And there was more of this kind of support which came out in the days and weeks after the story broke on the Times. But I think that only happened because of the really proactive and brave approach that Andreas and the team took, and which was great to see. Of course, an inquiry afterwards found that the Times had actually distorted the case, and they did a little apology somewhere buried probably on page 93 somewhere. Other media outlets covered it in a bit more detail, which was great to see. As I say, the team picked up two awards for their work here, which is really great to see. And hats off for the team for actually entering into the awards, because obviously when you're dealing with crisis situations, it's very easy to feel like you can't put that forward for something like an award because you feel a little bit guilty doing so. But actually we should. This is an important part of the comms team's work, and it will happen to all of us at some point, and we should be proud. And that team there, I felt proud of them actually for the way they dealt with that issue and put right some of the wrongs that have been told.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Really interesting example there. So next, I'd like to just take a quick look at around the broader theme of digital transformation. And we asked in this year's survey, what are some of the key barriers holding back some of these transformation projects. Unsurprisingly, lack of funding and the grip of austerity continues to bite across the public sector. But interestingly, this year there were some other, I guess, kind of more cultural themes that started to come through, equally preventing some of these projects from kind of taking place. So barriers around being risk averse or an unwillingness to change. Barriers around the lack of organisational agility. There are also themes around leadership and maybe a lack of knowledge around tech and some of the different pieces of tech that are available out there. So I think it's interesting now that it's not just the funding, although obviously that's a key issue. Typically, with projects of this nature, it's quite often the cultural piece that needs to be kind of addressed first, and often that's the hardest piece to get right.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, so I think for me, again, on my consultancy training travels, what I've spotted over the past 2 years really is that the barriers for me, I call them the 4 T's, which is time, tech, trust and training, and they'll be slightly different in every organisation. Trust is a biggie, and we've still not necessarily nailed this in some organisations. And we have to trust our staff, and we have to trust the comms team to be competent and to not do daft things. And you know what, they don't. It's a very rare thing that comms teams do make huge clangers. So we need to believe in our people. I really like this example, which this is Worcestershire Acute Hospitals. They won the UN Award for Best Social Media Account. Now, I can tell you there were 60 plus entries in this. I think you helped with some of the judging, didn't you, Stuart? There are some fantastic social media accounts out there. I could talk all day about some of my favourites. This one won because actually it was brave, it was trusting, and it was a social media account that actually was both an internal and an external platform, which is probably slightly different from the norm. So Becky Bourne, the head of comms there, and Pete Orton in the comms team, I've done some really interesting work with a Facebook group. Now, the Facebook group is for staff, but it has external members and followers, and it is encouraged that patients can use the page as well, which I love, the trust and transparency angle which is involved here. So the group, they launched it, and within 24 hours, they had over 2,000 of their staff already joined up. That, we've all battled with internal comms challenges in the past, haven't we? To get a third of your staff signed up to a Facebook page in a day is no mean feat. So well done for that. They've now got over half of their staff, 3,000 people, on that page. Many of their staff are already Facebook users. They're comfortable with the platform. But it's more than that. It's about the content that's shared and the trusting environment that's there. And if a problem flags up and the organisation's done something wrong, they'll deal with it. Equally, they showcase and they're proud of their staff and their work, and they will flag that both internally and to external followers as well. I think now they're at the point where they've got nearly 70% of their followers are staff, but actually just over 30% are members of the public. So it's that really nice balance of, internal comms doesn't operate in a vacuum. Just because it's internal, it doesn't mean it escapes. Your staff are also your local residents and your local community, and it's a really powerful way to be able to share those internal messages externally. They do lots of things, but just very quickly, they do a Thank You Thursday, which attracts really high levels of engagement and lots of positive praise and thanks for the staff from members of the public for the really, really important work that NHS colleagues do. So it's a simple idea, really, isn't it? It's a really simple approach, but it works. The older I get, the more convinced I am that simple's the way to go. So, but a lot of work obviously goes on behind the scenes to make the account work. In latest numbers, well, you could say that these are just metrics, and there's some great numbers there to talk about. The best bit is that the staff love it. The staff trust and like the platform. They use it. They post their own content. This isn't the comms team account. This is the organisations and the wider patients account. So there's some really great content there. Go and have a look, go and give them a follow yourself. And I think well done to Becky and Pete and the comms team there at Worcestershire Acute Hospitals for doing the simple, but doing it really, really well.
Thanks, Darren. That was great, and well done to Worcester Trust for winning that award. For the next 5-10 minutes or so, we'd like to just kind of open things up to you guys. Are there any, from what you've seen today, what questions do you have that you'd like to kind of put towards Darren or myself or anybody else in the chat today? We'll just take a couple of minutes to give you guys time to send those through. Just to flag up the next webinar that we're running here at Orlo, we've got GIFGAF, the guys that sponsor The Voice on TV. They're joining us in June to talk about some of the stuff they do on social media. So it'd be great if many of you could join us for that. I want to just talk for a couple of minutes, just while we wait for some of the questions to come through, about some of the projects we're involved with here at Orlo around the kind of online engagement, digital transformation piece. One really interesting one with Bromford Housing, who are involved with the largest kind of Microsoft Dynamics implementation in the UK. So what these guys are doing is they're plugging in Orlo and their social media platform to their CRM. And what this then allows them to do is when they're responding to somebody on Twitter or Facebook or wherever it might be, it allows them to respond in a much more informed way, because they can see through that CRM integration what this person they're speaking to has said to somebody on the telephone line or on the email recently. So it starts to build that kind of unified view of the public and the customer, and through doing that they can kind of provide some really effective kind of online engagement and customer service there. There's a couple of examples I dropped in from the private sector just to kind of give things a slightly different flavour. So Ocado, the world's largest online-only supermarket, I think they are. We work with those guys across both our social media and live chat offerings. So they've got, I think, 300 agents, all both trained using live chat and social. This allows them to handle multiple conversations. If you're getting bombarded with lots of messages and lots of comments each day, again, having your customer service staff trained across multiple channels allows them to drive kind of some really big internal efficiency. Pendragon PLC, just to pick another one out, they're one of the largest automotive dealerships in the UK. What these guys do really well is achieve that great balance between kind of efficiency and automation, but also meaningful engagement on social media and live chat. Let's use things like automation within platforms like Orlo to pick up some of those FAQs, some of those low value repetitive tasks, and to free up your comms people or your customer service people to focus maybe on the more complex or the more niche inquiries. Maybe it requires a more empathetic response. Let's leave humans to be good at what humans are good at, where it requires that more meaningful interaction. IBM Watson, we integrate with an organization called Grupo Alsa, which are the Spanish subsidiary of National Express coaches. And these guys use Facebook Messenger and an integration with IBM Watson. Again, we're talking about automation and self-serving, but to let their customers self-serve through their FAQs directly through Facebook Messenger. But actually, sometimes, I'm sure we've all been there, you can get stuck in that endless loop where the bot doesn't quite understand what you want. So what we do there, we provide them with a bit of a trapdoor. So if someone gets stuck, they can then switch from the chat bot to an agent and speak one-to-one and get their kind of question answered that way. And finally, I mentioned it earlier in terms of some of the stuff we're doing with the police at a national level. This is a really interesting project where I mentioned that appetite from the public to report crime through social media. What we've developed and we're trialing with a number of police forces across the UK is the ability to actually receive non-emergency 101 crimes through social media. But obviously, just like a telephone recording of somebody reporting a crime, that needs to be as admissible in court as evidence as a telephone recording. So we're using a little bit of blockchain technology there to actually export and encrypt these social media conversations so they can't be tampered with, and they can then be used as evidence in court. So some really important and interesting projects that I thought would be quite useful maybe to just flag up to get kind of people thinking about, some of the opportunities out there around online engagement and digital transformation at the moment. I mentioned earlier, I know that there's quite a few of our kind of customers and non-customers on the webinar this morning. Many of you will have known us for 5 or 6 years as Social Sign-In, and we rebranded last year in, I think it was September or October, to Orlo. The reasons for that very simply is, we're starting to see this proliferation of digital touch points growing year on year. And so for a comms or a customer service person, rather than having 10 different contact channels open with 10 different systems and 10 different tabs on their desktop to manage them, if you can manage these different touch points in a much more holistic and integrated way, you can then produce a really powerful digital presence and some really great comms campaigns. So we thought, actually, obviously having the word social within our name kind of limited what we could be going forward. If you just want the social media platform within Orlo, that hasn't changed at all. But now you can increasingly start to manage different channels like live chat, like CRM integration. We've included things like social media advertising. We spoke earlier about how important it is now to put a few pounds, shillings and pence, if you're in that fortunate position to do that, to get those key campaigns seen. So just very quickly, that was the kind of reason that I wanted to explain just behind that rebrand and that repositioning. So if you've got any questions on that, just respond to the email that we'll be sending out tomorrow with all of the resources from today, and we can come back to you on that one.
Thanks, Stuart. Oh, sorry, people. There's my ugly mugshot. So just a very quick word. Comms 2.0, there's lots of resources on the website. If you haven't looked recently, just flagging 3 there. So there's a really useful toolbox area where there are things like social media policies, comms planning resources, there's free downloads, various other bits and pieces. And also if there's other resources that I'm going to be adding there soon, by the way, just as an exclusive. But if there are things that you would find useful to be created and put into that area of the website as free downloads, do shout. The jobs pages, I'm sure you're all very, very happy with your wonderful current employers, but if you are on the lookout for a job, that jobs page has been red hot recently with lots of web traffic and lots of new jobs being added. The blog posts and the case studies, I've mentioned a couple already today, but there's over 1,400 posts and case studies from 500 contributors now. So it is an absolute treasure trove of learning. So 2 things, go and have a look. If you've got a question around, how do we do tone of voice on social media? There are case studies there. Equally, shout about your own good work, because I know there are people on this chat that do great work. So, write a blog post and send it to me and we'll get it onto the website. So finally, I do lots of in-house consultancy and training. One of the things I've been most busy with in the last 18 months is my supercharged social media training, coming into a team and delivering tailored social media support and training for comms and customer services people. So hopefully those things are quite useful.
Okay, great. Thanks, Darren. I could see you scribbling down a few notes.
Yes.
We've had quite a few messages and questions sent through, so that's fantastic. Thanks for sending those through. Darren, were there any that jumped out at you that you'd like to just dig into for a couple of minutes?
There's quite a few, and thank you for sending questions. This is good. So I think Oldham, CCG, we're talking about, were there negative comments on that Facebook group that Worcestershire had set up? It's a good question, and this question came up at the masterclass when I presented it 2 weeks ago, actually. There were a couple, as you'd expect, not many. I mean, it was in the single figures percentage-wise in terms of overall comments. And I think it's that lovely thing is we shouldn't shy away from this. We shouldn't not do something in case somebody calls us out. Because if we get called out because we've done something rubbish, it's a cheesy complaint's a gift. But, if we have genuinely done something wrong, it's an opportunity to be aware of it, because actually the comms and customer services team might be unaware of it. We can go and put it right and point people in the right direction. Actually, very often, some of the criticism that comes in is wrong and it's not true. So it's, again, an opportunity to myth bust and to actually correct people. The beautiful thing that happens then is actually your followers will step in your defense. And I think we've all seen examples of this where, you actually don't even need to sometimes say anything yourself as the organisation. Your followers, if they feel that you've been slighted unfairly, will step in and support. And I think that's a beautiful thing when that happens. It only ever happened to me once, but it's a really nice feeling. So I think we know the message is we shouldn't shy away. We need to be trusting. We need to be transparent. We need to accept criticism if it's fair. We need to challenge it when it's unfair. I think second question that jumped out, I think this was from Jake and also colleagues in Dorset, was how many people run social media accounts across an organisation, and what's the best approach? I don't know what you think, Stuart, but it's a really tricky one, this, isn't it? And I don't think one size fits all, because to be frank, there are comms teams out there that are made up of just one or two people, and for those teams, they do everything. Others, you've got teams of 20 plus, so there's a different approach needed there. I think all I would say is, for me, that every single comms person, whether you're director of comms or you're the comms assistant, we all need to be skilled. We all need to play a part. I really like the campaign-led approaches, where we develop campaigns around our big priorities, and then we get our most skilled people in to support those campaigns. But for me, absolutely, you need to be skilled in social media. We can't have that excuse that, oh, Dave does that, but he's on holiday this week. We all need to be skilled. These are just another set of channels we need to be competent in. So I don't know if that answers your question, Jake and Dorset, but I think it's about understanding the resources that you have, where you've got advantages, where you've got assets and skills internally, and how you best deploy them. And it will be slightly different for different teams, but for sure, it's not an excuse to say that Dave's on holiday this week, we're not going to do something, because that boat has sailed.
Yeah, absolutely. One question I'd just like to put you on the spot with, Darren, is I think quite a few people have asked questions around this theme this morning is, once you have defined what you want your tone of voice to be for the organisation, firstly, I guess, how you break that corporate cycle of corporate language. But then also, if you are opening up your social media channels to different departments, customer services, or if you've got just a number of different accounts for libraries or whatever it might be, how do you achieve that consistency of tone of voice across different teams and departments?
Yeah, it's a great question, isn't it? And it's an ongoing challenge, because what you find is very often, we mentioned earlier, that comms teams have very often done work around tone of voice, and they've got that in a really good place. And then your customer services people might not be in the same place. So you can then get a slightly distorted, inconsistent approach on social, depending on who responds. So I think that's very much, I've done this myself, getting comms and customer services into the same room, running a tone of voice exercise and agreeing how we do that. I think that's really, really important. Lots of people have done good work around this, but actually what I've found is, for many teams, they haven't actually really sat down and put pen to paper on, well, what is their tone of voice? How do we want to be perceived? And there's something around when to do the fun, more trivial stuff, if you like, and when that's appropriate and when it's not. And comms people have great gut instincts. If you've got a major incident happening in your town or city or in your organisation on any given day, you probably won't do the light-hearted stuff that day. It's about timing, isn't it? But for me, the big learning point is corporate and stuffy does not work on social media. And I've been wheeled in to give that message to senior management teams, because sometimes, the internal team doesn't get listened to anymore. And it's really easy for me as an external person to go in and say that. It doesn't. Corporate and stuffy doesn't work on social media. We've all tried it. It doesn't work. The best social media accounts out there are human and engaging and sharing interesting content. And that's something to aim at for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd echo that. One question that came through from Wakefield, thanks for sending that through, was live chats versus chat bots. So I think, it is that kind of ongoing debate, and there's certainly a place for both from what we're seeing. Probably more in the private sector at the moment, but I think chat bots do have a place. I mentioned earlier about FAQs. If there are those, you'll probably find that, out of all of the inbound inquiries that you get, 80% of those will be the same 10 or dozen questions. So if you can use some kind of automation, some kind of chat bot to help people get to that information and self-serve and answer those typical FAQs, it frees up your people to focus on the more complex or the more niche inquiries, or just to jump on some kind of comms opportunity like we saw earlier. So I think it's about having that balance between both. If you do use a chatbot, I think it's always best to be open and honest and let people know they're speaking to a robot and they're speaking to a machine, rather than trying to dupe them into otherwise. And again, like I mentioned earlier, if you are using a chatbot, it's really important, rather than the customer getting stuck in that endless loop where they can't find their answer, to give them that trap door so they can jump out and they can speak to one of your customer services people to have that kind of human one-to-one conversation. I guess the question that I'd just like to finish on is, we spoke earlier about some kind of cultural barriers. I know it's the kind of there's no silver bullet for that, but I mean, Darren, from your experiences, we've looked at, we saw some of the themes come through this year around being risk averse, not having buy-in from the leadership, around some of those digital transformations. So often it's the hardest kind of nut to crack, is that cultural piece. So, I mean, from your travels up and down the UK, what are your kind of examples you've seen around getting that kind of cultural piece right around digital transformation?
Yeah, it's a great question, isn't it? And it's really interesting to see there's such a diverse range of kind of senior management teams and cultures out there. It can vary so much across the sectors. We've got, you look at somewhere like Doncaster, which I flagged earlier, and their chief exec, who was there, Joe Miller, was really encouraging and had that same kind of less risk averse approach herself, and was really supportive of what the comms team were doing and wanted to see more of that, because she thought that was the best way to engage with her residents and her businesses. There are other, without naming names and getting people into trouble, there are management teams out there that they are still in the 1990s, let's be honest, and we need to just stop doing that, because it doesn't work. It's easy for me to sit here rather and say that, and much harder to crack. But what I have found is, and I'm thinking of remember the NHS blood example from a couple of years ago, where they ran the campaign to try and attract more black and ethnic minority groups to come forward and give blood. And in the instant they launched the campaign on Twitter, they started getting racist abuse. And of course, they retweeted back with the, well, we could just deport you tweet, which to this day is my favourite tweet of all time. It's brave. The reality is that, Melissa there, who posted it in the comms team, did she go to her senior management team and say, can I respond to this racist tweet with, or we could just deport you? Because no management team in the land will ever sign that off, and it won't appear in any social media guidelines anywhere. But instinctively, as a comms person, that's the right thing to do. And it's easier not to do that. But when you do it, the good people will come out and support you. And that campaign was probably way, way more successful, because it challenged that horrible racist abuse in a really brave and open and honest way. And I think, sometimes, again, easy for me to say, but sometimes we don't go and ask the management team, we just do it. Because, these people on this call have good gut instincts, and they know if it's a good thing to do or not. If you're not sure, sleep on it. But if you are sure, do you know what? Just go and do it. And I think, for me, you could distill all of this down into, for me, 4 really simple steps. It's 1, it's spotting the opportunities across digital and social media and being fleet of foot to respond to them. It's 2, making the time to be creative. Being good on social isn't a 5-minute exercise at the end of the day. It takes time, and we need to recognise that. 3, be brave. So when we're challenged, if we're confident in our products, our services, be brave and challenge back. And 4, have a plan, because, the people that are best at this stuff have a plan. A simple plan is the way to go for me, but we do need to have a plan. So spot the opportunities, be creative, be brave, have a plan.
I think that's the perfect way to end it right there. Thanks, Darren, for summing all of that up. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm aware it's kind of 12 o'clock. It's the top of the hour. I'm sure you're eager to get back to your desks or maybe nip out for lunch. So thanks to everyone for joining us this morning. It's been a great turnout, lots of engagement, which is fantastic to see. As I mentioned earlier, over the next couple of days, you'll be receiving an email with a link so you can rewatch the webinar. You can share it with colleagues. You can access the ebook, which shares all of the results from this year's survey, along with some great contributions from half a dozen or so people from out there in the industry as well. As I mentioned, we've got our next gift gaff webinar on the 13th of June. So do give us a follow on social media. Hello, Orlo. Any questions you've got around any of the topics we've covered today or the tech we've covered, drop us an email at hello@orlo.tech or visit us at www.orlo.tech. I think it just goes to say thank you for Darren for joining us.
Thank you for the invite and for the coffee. It was a very good coffee, Stuart. Well done.
Thank you.
He's barista trained.
I think I've peaked too soon. It's all downhill from here. But yeah, thank you for joining us. Look out for all those resources in your inbox over the next couple of days. And yeah, have a great rest of the week.